Some men are born into darkness. Others are dragged in kicking and screaming. Luca Virelli thought he knew which kind he was, until the night he stood face to face with the man who destroyed his family and felt his heart betray everything he believed about himself. This is a story about obsession, buried truth, and the kind of love that blooms in blood-soaked soil. If you want to know whether forgiveness can survive betrayal, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story reaches.
It sounds...
The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the Chicago streets into black mirrors that reflected neon and headlights in fractured patterns. Luca Virelli stood under the awning of a closed pharmacy, water dripping from his dark hair onto the collar of his jacket. 23 years old, and he still looked like someone who hadn't quite figured out how to take up space in the world. Narrow shoulders, careful eyes, hands shoved deep in his pockets like he was trying to disappear into himself. He shouldn't have been in this neighborhood. Everyone knew that. The South Side had unwritten rules, and one of them was that people like him, quiet, broke, nobody, didn't wander into territory that belonged to men who settled disputes with bullets instead of lawyers. But the bus had broken down 6 blocks back, and his phone was dead, and he'd made the stupid choice to cut through instead of waiting in the rain. Now he was lost, and the streets all looked the same, and somewhere behind him he could hear footsteps that matched his pace too perfectly to be coincidence. Luca walked faster. The footsteps matched him. He turned a corner into an alley that smelled like garbage and piss, realized too late it was a dead end, spun around to backtrack, and there they were. 3 men, spreading out to block the exit. The one in front had a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a pale line against dark skin. He smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Lost, kid?" Luca's mouth went dry. "Just trying to get to the L." "Yeah?" The scarred man stepped closer. "Funny place to look for it." "I made a wrong turn." "A lot of wrong turns tonight." Another step. "Empty your pockets." Luca's heart hammered against his ribs. He had maybe $40 in his wallet, a student ID, a broken watch his father had given him years ago. Nothing worth dying over, but everything he owned in the world. "I don't have much." "I said empty your fucking pockets." Luca reached for his wallet with shaking hands. This was it. This was how people got hurt in this city. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong face. He'd seen the news reports, read the statistics, told himself it wouldn't happen to him because he was careful, because he kept his head down, because the gunshot cracked through the air like the world splitting open. Luca's whole body jerked, instinct throwing him against the brick wall. But he wasn't hit. The scarred man wasn't moving either, frozen, staring past Luca's shoulder at something that had just stepped into the mouth of the alley. Or someone. "Gentlemen," a voice said, and it was the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to command attention. Low, smooth, carrying weight the way marble carries cold. "You're in the wrong part of town." Luca turned his head slowly. The man who'd fired the gun stood maybe 10 feet away, utterly still in a way that suggested violence could erupt from stillness at any second. He was tall, not towering, but built like someone who understood exactly how much force his body could generate and had spent years perfecting the delivery. Dark suit, expensive, tailored to allow movement. Black hair pushed back from a face that was all hard angles and sharper intent. And eyes, Christ, his eyes, that looked at the 3 men like he was calculating exactly how many seconds it would take to end them. The scarred man found his voice. "Mr. Moretti, we didn't know..." "You didn't know what? That this alley is protected? That I don't allow street trash to operate here?" Enzo Moretti, because that's who this had to be, Luca realized with a cold shock of recognition, took a single step forward and all 3 men flinched. "Or did you not know that I don't tolerate people touching what's mine?" Luca's brain stuttered over that last part, but the scarred man was already backing up, hands raised. "We weren't here to cause trouble. Just, you pulled a weapon in my territory. That is causing trouble." Enzo's gun stayed level, pointed at the ground, but somehow still a threat. "You have 10 seconds to be gone. After that, I stop counting and start shooting." They ran. All 3 of them, scrambling over each other to get out of the alley, disappearing into the rain-soaked night like roaches when the lights come on. Silence filled the space they left behind. Luca stayed pressed against the wall, heart still racing, unable to make his legs work. Enzo Moretti. He'd heard the name whispered in bars, muttered in newsrooms where his mother used to work, spoken with a mixture of fear and fascination by people who understood that Chicago's underworld had hierarchies just as rigid as any corporation. And at the top of that hierarchy, for the past decade, stood the man now looking at him with an expression Luca couldn't quite read. "You all right?" Enzo asked. Luca nodded, then shook his head. Yeah, I think so." "You think so or you know so?" "I'm not shot." The words came out sharper than intended, adrenaline translating to anger because anger was easier than terror. "So yeah, I'm all right." Enzo's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You've got a mouth on you. You just saved my life. I'm allowed to be a little rattled." "Most people say thank you." "Thank you." Luca pushed off the wall, legs still shaky but functional. "Can I go now?" "Where are you trying to get to?" "The El North Side. Long walk from here." Enzo holstered his gun. Luca hadn't even seen him draw it, realized it must have been pointed at those men the entire time, and gestured toward the street. "I'll give you a ride." Every instinct Luca had screamed that getting in a car with a crime boss was possibly stupider than wandering through South Side alleys in the rain. But the alternative was walking through those same streets alone, and he'd already proven tonight that his decision-making skills were questionable at best. Why? The question came out before Luca could stop it. "Why help me?" Enzo looked at him for a long moment, something flickering across his face that might have been recognition or regret or both. "Because you remind me of someone I used to know." That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. The car was exactly what Luca expected. Black, expensive, the kind of vehicle that cost more than most people made in 5 years. Leather interior, tinted windows, the faint smell of cologne and gunpowder. Luca climbed into the passenger seat and immediately felt like he was sitting in a confessional, waiting to admit sins he hadn't committed yet. Enzo slid behind the wheel with the ease of someone who'd made this drive 1,000 times. He didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he turned slightly, studying Luca's profile in a way that made Luca's skin prickle. "What's your name?" "Does it matter?" "Humor me." "Luca." He hesitated. "Luca Virelli." The change in Enzo's expression was microscopic, a slight tightening around the eyes, a pause in his breathing, but Luca caught it anyway. Recognition. Real recognition, not the vague sort from before. "Virelli," Enzo repeated slowly. "Antonio Virelli's son." The world tilted sideways. Luca turned to stare at him, pulse suddenly loud in his ears. "How do you know my father's name?" "I knew him." Enzo's voice had gone carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that came from practice. "A long time ago." "Bullshit." The word came out hot and hard. "My father was a journalist. He didn't run in your circles." "No, he didn't." Enzo started the car, eyes fixed on the windshield as rain hammered against the glass. "But our circles intersected once, that's all." Luca's father had been dead for 7 years. Heart attack, the doctor said. Sudden, unexpected, tragic. Luca had been 16, still stupid enough to believe that adults told the truth and the world made sense. He'd spent the years since learning otherwise. "When did you know him?" "The year he died." Something cold and sharp lodged itself in Luca's chest. "Were you there when—" "No." Enzo pulled out into traffic, windshield wipers cutting through the rain in steady rhythm. "But I knew he was in trouble. I tried to help." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that gets people killed." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Luca wanted to push, to demand answers to questions he'd been asking himself for 7 years. But something in Enzo's posture, rigid, controlled, locked down tight, suggested that pushing would get him nowhere. They drove in silence through streets that gradually shifted from industrial decay to residential quiet. Luca gave directions without thinking, his mind spinning through possibilities and implications. His father had known Enzo Moretti, had been in some kind of trouble, the kind that gets people killed. Heart attack. That's what they'd said. But his father had been 41 years old, in good health, no family history of cardiac problems. And the week before he died, he'd been acting strange, distracted, paranoid, checking the locks on doors and windows like he expected someone to break in. Luca had asked what was wrong. His father had smiled and ruffled his hair and said, "Nothing you need to worry about, kiddo." 3 days later, he was dead. What story was he working on? Luca heard himself ask. Enzo glanced at him. What makes you think he was working on a story? Because he was always working on a story. That's all he did. Dig up dirt, piss off powerful people, write things that made them uncomfortable. Luca's throat felt tight. What was it this time? Something bigger than him? Enzo's hands tightened on the wheel. Something he should have walked away from. But he didn't. No, he didn't. Because that wasn't who he was. No. Enzo's voice went softer. It wasn't. They pulled up outside Luca's apartment building, a converted factory in a neighborhood that was trying very hard to gentrify and mostly failing. Luca should have gotten out. Should have thanked Enzo again and disappeared into his shitty studio and tried to forget this night ever happened. Instead, he turned in his seat and looked directly at the man who'd saved his life and maybe, probably, knew more about his father's death than anyone else still breathing. I want to know what happened to him. Enzo met his eyes. No, you don't. That's not your decision to make. Actually, it is. Enzo reached across him, close enough that Luca could smell rain and expensive fabric softener, and opened the passenger door. Go home, Luca. Forget you met me. Forget your father knew me. Live your life. And if I can't, then you're more like him than I thought. Enzo's expression was unreadable. And that's not a compliment. Luca climbed out into the rain, stood on the curb watching the car pull away. His hands were still shaking, but not from fear anymore. From something else. Something that felt like rage and grief and desperate, aching need to understand why his father had died, and why this stranger looked at him like he was a ghost come back to haunt the living. He went inside, climbed 4 flights of stairs to his apartment, locked the door behind him, and stood in the dark dripping water onto cheap linoleum. Then he pulled out his laptop and started searching. Enzo Moretti, Antonio Virelli, the year before his father died. The internet gave him pieces, fragments, breadcrumbs leading into darkness. His father had been working on a series about organized crime in Chicago, focusing on the Moretti family's involvement in everything from gambling to human trafficking to political corruption. The article stopped 3 months before his death, abandoned mid-investigation, no explanation given. But there were drafts on his old hard drive. Luca had kept everything from his father's office, unable to throw away even the broken pens and coffee-stained notepads. He'd backed up the computer years ago, stored the files in a folder he never opened because opening it hurt too much. He opened it now. The drafts were incomplete, scattered, but they painted a picture. Antonio Virelli had gotten close to something, had identified a major weapons smuggling operation running through the port of Chicago, organized by someone high up in the Moretti organization, had names, dates, shipment manifests, had enough evidence to bring down an empire, and then he'd died. Luca read until his eyes burned and the sky outside started turning gray with dawn. Then he closed the laptop and sat very still, trying to breathe around the weight crushing his chest. His father hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd been murdered. And Enzo Moretti, the man who'd saved him tonight, who'd looked at him with something almost like guilt, who'd known Antonio Virelli the year he died, knew exactly what had happened. Luca didn't plan to see him again. Didn't plan to do anything except maybe drink himself stupid and try to figure out if revenge was something people actually pursued in real life or just in movies. But the universe had other plans. 2 nights later, he was walking home from his shift at the bookstore where he worked part-time to pay for his criminology degree, the irony of which wasn't lost on him, when a car pulled up beside him. Not the same car from before. This one was silver, sleek, driven by a man in a dark suit who looked like he bench-pressed small cars for fun. Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you. Luca kept walking. Tell Mr. Moretti I'm busy. It's not a request. Then it's a kidnapping. I'm pretty sure that's illegal, even for you people. The car kept pace with him. Please, get in the car, Mr. Virelli. Something about the way he said please, like the word cost him physical pain, made Luca stop. He looked at the driver, then at the empty street around them, then at his own reflection in the car's tinted windows. He got in. They drove to a restaurant in the West Loop, the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu and required reservations 6 months in advance. The driver led him through a private entrance, up a back staircase, into a room where Enzo Moretti sat alone at a table set for two. "Sit," Enzo said. Luca stayed standing. "I didn't come here to eat." "Then you came here to talk. Either way, you'll be more comfortable sitting." "I'll be more comfortable when you tell me the truth about my father." Enzo's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Luca." This time it wasn't a suggestion. Luca sat. A waiter appeared, poured wine neither of them had ordered, disappeared again. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. Enzo watched him with those unsettling dark eyes, and Luca forced himself not to look away. "You've been digging," Enzo finally said. "Is that a crime?" "It's dangerous." "So was getting mugged in an alley. Seems like danger finds me regardless." "Not if you stop looking for it." "I'm not looking for danger." Luca leaned forward. "I'm looking for answers. About my father. About what he was investigating. About why he died and why you looked at me like you'd seen a ghost when I told you my name." Enzo picked up his wine glass, turned it slowly in his hand. "Your father was a good man." "I know that. Tell me something I don't know." "He was also a stubborn fool who didn't understand when to quit." "Sounds like you knew him pretty well." "Well enough." Enzo took a sip of wine. "He came to me 7 years ago with questions. About my family's business operations. About shipments coming through the port. About bribes and protection rackets, and all the ugly things that keep this city running underneath the surface." Luca's pulse kicked up. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. At first." Enzo set down the glass. But he kept pushing, kept finding evidence, kept building a case that would have destroyed everything my family had built over 3 generations. So I had a choice to make. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "What choice?" Luca asked, even though part of him already knew the answer. "Whether to stop him, permanently." The words hung there, ugly and honest. Luca's hands clenched under the table. "Did you?" "No." Enzo met his eyes. "But I didn't save him either." "What the fuck does that mean?" "It means I made a deal with my uncle, the man who actually ran things back then. I convinced him that killing a journalist would bring too much attention, that there were other ways to handle the problem, and he agreed." Enzo's voice stayed level, but something painful flickered across his face. "On the condition that your father stop investigating, stop writing, disappear from the story completely." "And my father said no." "Your father said he'd rather die than let people like us operate in the dark." Luca's breath caught. "So you killed him?" "I didn't touch him." "But someone in your family did." "My uncle gave the order, made it look natural. A heart attack at home, nothing suspicious, no autopsy required." Enzo's jaw tightened. "I found out 2 hours after it happened. By then, it was too late to stop it. Too late to do anything except make sure you were protected." The world tilted again, but this time Luca held on. "Protected," he repeated numbly. "You protected me. I made sure no one touched you. Made sure you could finish school, get your degree, live your life without looking over your shoulder. I owed your father that much. You owed him a lot more than that." "Yes." No argument, no justification, just acknowledgement. "I did." Luca stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. His whole body was shaking now, adrenaline and fury and grief all tangled together into something that felt like it might tear him apart from the inside. "You let him die." Enzo didn't deny it. "You knew they were going to kill him and you did nothing." "I tried to negotiate, tried to find another way. But when it came down to it," Enzo's voice cracked, just barely. "I chose my family over his life, and I've lived with that choice every day since." "Good." The word came out vicious. "I hope it destroys you." He turned toward the door. "Luca." He stopped, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. "If you keep digging into this, you'll end up like your father. Dead before you turn 25, buried in a lie, mourned by people who never knew the truth. Is that what you want?" "What I want," Luca said quietly, "is for you to stay the hell away from me." He walked out. Down the stairs, through the restaurant, onto the street where the cold air hit his face like a slap. He made it half a block before his legs gave out, and he had to sit down on the curb, head between his knees, trying not to throw up. His father was murdered by Enzo Moretti's family, And Enzo had tried to stop it, maybe, but ultimately had chosen loyalty over justice, over life, over everything Antonio Virelli had believed in. Luca sat there until the shaking stopped. Then he stood up, squared his shoulders, and started walking. He didn't know where he was going yet, but he knew with cold certainty that this wasn't over. Not even close. Luca didn't go home that night. He walked until his feet ached, until the city's late-night sounds faded into the pre-dawn silence, until he found himself standing outside the cemetery where his father was buried. The gates were locked, but he climbed the fence anyway, dropped down on the other side, and made his way through rows of headstones to the simple marker that read, Antonio Virelli, beloved father and truth seeker. He sat down in the grass, wet with dew, and tried to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do now. I found out, he said to the stone. His voice sounded strange in the quiet. About what really happened. About who was responsible. The stone didn't answer. Stones never did. There's this guy, Enzo Moretti. He says he tried to save you, but I don't know if I believe him. I don't know if it matters. Luca's throat tightened. He's the one who's been protecting me all these years, making sure I stayed safe, and I hate that. I hate that I owe him anything. A breeze moved through the cemetery, rustling leaves that hadn't been raked in weeks. What am I supposed to do, Dad? Let it go? Pretend I don't know? Or... He stopped because the alternative was too big and too terrifying to say out loud. Revenge. Justice. Two words that sounded the same but meant completely different things depending on who was speaking. He stayed until the sun came up, painting the headstones gold and pink. Then he climbed back over the fence and went home to his apartment, where he slept for 14 hours straight and woke up feeling like someone had filled his skull with concrete. His phone had 6 missed calls. 3 from work, asking where he was. 2 from numbers he didn't recognize. 1 from a contact labeled simply EM. He stared at that last one for a long time before deleting it without listening to the voicemail. For a week, Luca tried to go back to normal. Went to class, where he sat through lectures on criminal psychology and sociological theories of deviance while thinking about his father's murderer. Went to work, where he shelved books and helped customers and pretended his entire understanding of the world hadn't been ripped apart. Went through the motions of living while feeling like a passenger in his own life. But normal was a lie, and he'd never been good at lying. On Thursday night, he was closing up the bookstore when the silver car pulled up outside again. Same driver, same expressionless face, same non-request that felt like a command. Mr. Moretti is waiting for you. Luca locked the door, pocketed the keys. Tell him I'm not interested. He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you he has something that belonged to your father. That stopped him cold. What? I don't ask questions, Mr. Virelli. I just drive. Luca stood there on the sidewalk, war happening inside his chest. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to walk away, to go home, to stop engaging with a man who represented everything wrong with the world. But rationality had never been his strong suit, especially not when it came to his father. He got in the car. This time they drove to a building in River North, luxury condos with a doorman and marble floors, and the kind of hushed wealth that didn't need to announce itself. The elevator took them to the top floor, where only 2 doors existed in the entire hallway. The driver knocked on one, then stepped back. Enzo opened it himself. He looked different in casual clothes. Dark jeans, black sweater, no suit jacket or tie. More human somehow. Which made it worse, because Luca didn't want to see him as human. Humans were complicated. Humans made mistakes. Humans could be forgiven. Come in, Enzo said. The apartment was exactly what Luca expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Yes, it was expensive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that probably cost more than Luca's entire education, art on the walls that might have been originals. But it was also lived in. Books stacked on tables, a coffee mug with dried rings on the bottom, a jacket thrown over the back of a chair. Evidence of an actual person existing in the space, not just a crime boss maintaining an image. Enzo closed the door, locked it. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water? You said you had something of my father's. Right to business. I can respect that. Enzo crossed to a desk in the corner, opened a drawer, pulled out a file folder. He held it for a moment, like he was reconsidering, then handed it over. Inside were documents. Photocopies of shipping manifests, financial records, correspondence between people whose names Luca didn't recognize, and notes in his father's handwriting, cramped, messy, brilliant. Analysis, connections, theories, everything Antonio Virelli had been working on before he died. "Where did you get this?" Luca's voice came out hoarse. "From your father. He gave it to me 3 days before he was killed." Luca looked up sharply. "Why would he give you his evidence?" "Insurance." Enzo leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "He knew my uncle was going to move against him. Knew he might not survive, so he made a deal. If anything happened to him, I'd keep this safe. Make sure it didn't disappear." "But you didn't do anything with it?" "No." No excuses in Enzo's voice, just fact. "I kept it locked away, told myself I was protecting you by keeping it hidden, but really, I was protecting myself." "From what?" "From having to admit that my family murdered an innocent man. From having to choose between blood and what's right." Enzo's expression was carved from stone. "From becoming the kind of person my uncle always wanted me to be." Luca gripped the folder so hard the edges bent. "And what kind of person is that? The kind who puts power over principles, who justifies cruelty as necessity, who looks at someone like your father and sees a problem to be eliminated instead of a human being worth protecting." "Sounds like you're describing yourself." "I am." Enzo didn't flinch from it. "I made that choice 7 years ago, and I've been trying to figure out how to unmake it ever since." The admission hung between them, raw and uncomfortable. Luca wanted to throw the folder in his face, wanted to scream, wanted to hurt him the way Enzo's family had hurt his father. But another part of him, smaller, quieter, more dangerous, wanted to understand. "Why now?" he asked. "Why give this to me now? Because you're not going to stop digging. And if you keep doing it alone, without knowing the whole picture, you'll get yourself killed." Enzo pushed off from the desk, moved to the windows. Chicago spread out below them, lights against darkness. "Your father gave me this because he trusted that eventually I'd find the courage to do the right thing. I'm 7 years late, but I'm trying." "The right thing would have been saving his life." "Yes, it would have." Enzo's reflection in the glass looked haunted. "But I can't change the past. All I can do is try to keep his son from making the same mistakes he did." Luca opened the folder again, scanned the documents. His father's final work, preserved like a time capsule. Evidence of crimes that had never been prosecuted, truths that had been buried with the man who'd uncovered them. And in the margins, notes in Antonio's handwriting, names, dates, connections. One name appeared more than any other, Vincent Moretti, Enzo's uncle. "Is he still alive?" Luca asked. "Your uncle?" "No, he died 4 years ago, liver failure. So there's no one to prosecute, no one to hold accountable. Not for your father's murder, no. Vincent made sure of that before he died, destroyed records, paid off witnesses, buried everything so deep it would take a miracle to unearth it." Enzo turned from the window. "But the operation he was running, that's still active. Different people, same system. Still smuggling weapons, still bribing officials, still destroying lives for profit." Something cold settled in Luca's stomach. "You're part of it. I took over the family business when Vincent died, which means, yes, I'm part of it." No pride in the words, just weary acknowledgement. "I've been trying to dismantle it from the inside, move us toward legitimate operations, cut ties with the worst elements. But it's slow, and it's dangerous. And there are people in my organization who'd rather see me dead than see the empire crumble." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know what you're walking into if you decide to pursue this." Enzo met his eyes. "Your father was going to expose the weapons operation. That's what got him killed. If you try to finish what he started, the same people will come for you." "Let them." "Luca, I'm not afraid of them. You should be." Enzo crossed the room in 3 strides, got close enough that Luca could see the lines around his eyes, the scar on his left eyebrow, the exhaustion written into every feature. "These people don't hesitate, don't negotiate, don't care that you're young or innocent or that your father was a good man. They see a threat, they eliminate it. End of story. Then I'll eliminate them first." "With what? Evidence that's 7 years old? Notes from a dead journalist? A criminology degree and righteous anger?" Enzo's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. You'll last exactly as long as it takes them to realize you're a problem. Maybe a week. Maybe less. So what am I supposed to do? Luca shoved the folder against Enzo's chest. Take this and do nothing. Let my father's death mean nothing? No, you're supposed to be smart about it. Enzo grabbed his wrist, held it. Not hard, but firm enough to keep Luca from pulling away. You're supposed to let me help you. Luca laughed, bitter and sharp. Help me? You're one of them. I'm trying not to be. Trying doesn't bring back the dead. No, but it might keep the living alive. Enzo's grip tightened, just slightly. I can't undo what my family did to your father, but I can make sure you don't end up in the ground next to him. If you'll let me. The apartment was too quiet, too close. Luca could feel his pulse hammering where Enzo's fingers pressed against his wrist, could smell expensive cologne mixed with something warmer underneath. Every instinct told him to run, to get away from this man who represented everything wrong in his life. But his feet stayed planted, and his eyes stayed locked on Enzo's, and something terrifying was building in the space between them. Why do you care? Luca asked quietly. Really? Not the guilt, not the debt to my father. Why do you actually care whether I live or die? Enzo's thumb moved against the inside of Luca's wrist, probably unconsciously. The touch burned. Because when I look at you, I see everything I failed to protect 7 years ago, and He stopped, jaw working. I can't fail again. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. They stood there, too close. The folder pressed between them, like a barrier made of paper and ghosts. Luca should have pulled away. Should have grabbed the evidence and left and never looked back. Should have done 1,000 things that weren't standing in a crime boss's apartment feeling something dangerous coil in his gut. But he'd never been good at should. If I agree to this, he said slowly, if I let you help, I need something in return. Name it. The truth. All of it. Everything you know about what happened to my father. No more half answers, no more protection. I want to know exactly what he was investigating, who killed him, and why. Enzo released his wrist, stepped back. The loss of contact felt like cold water. Some of that truth will hurt. I don't care. You will. That's my problem, not yours. Luca's voice was steady now, decided. Do we have a deal or not? Enzo studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. We have a deal. They shook on it, formal and strange, and Luca tried not to think about how Enzo's hand felt against his. Warm, calloused, strong enough to break bones, but careful enough not to hurt. Tried not to think about how easy it would be to lean into that strength, to let someone else carry the weight for a while. Tried and failed. Over the next 2 weeks, Luca's life shifted into something he didn't recognize. He still went to class, still worked at the bookstore, still maintained the surface appearance of normalcy. But underneath, everything had changed. Enzo became a constant presence. Not physically, he was too smart to be seen with Luca in public too often, but in text messages, phone calls, meetings in out-of-the-way places where they could talk without being observed. He walked Luca through the evidence piece by piece, explaining the connections Antonio had uncovered, filling in gaps with his own knowledge of the organization. The weapons operation had been massive. Assault rifles, handguns, even explosives smuggled through the port of Chicago and distributed to gangs across the Midwest. Vincent Moretti had run it for years, protected by bribes that went all the way up to the state level. Luca's father had gotten close, too close, and paid the price. He came to me a week before he died, Enzo said one night. They were in his car, parked in an empty lot near the lake, watching water reflect city lights. Said he knew I wasn't like Vincent, that I'd gone to college, tried to go legitimate before my father died, and pulled me back into the family. He thought he could appeal to whatever conscience I had left. Could he? Yes. Enzo's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I told him I'd talk to Vincent, try to negotiate a deal. Your father would kill the story, and in exchange, Vincent would start transitioning the operation toward legal channels. It was naive as hell, but I believed I could make it work. What happened? Vincent laughed in my face, said I was soft, that my father would be ashamed, that journalists were rats who needed to be exterminated before they spread disease. Enzo's voice went flat. Then he gave me a choice. Handle it, or he would. Luca's chest ached. And you chose wrong. I chose to believe I could still negotiate. Thought if I bought time, found the right leverage, I could save your father without betraying my family. Enzo turned to look at him. But Vincent didn't give me time. He moved faster than I expected, and by the time I realized what was happening, Antonio was already dead. How did they do it? The question hurt to ask, but Luca needed to know. The heart attack, how did they fake it? Injection. Something that mimics cardiac arrest, leaves no trace after a few hours. Vincent had a guy, doctor, ex-military, specialized in making people disappear quietly. Enzo's jaw clenched. He walked into your apartment while you were at school, found your father working in his office, and that was it. 15 seconds, maybe. Then he called it in as a concerned neighbor who heard a fall. Luca closed his eyes. He'd been at school when it happened, had come home to police cars and paramedics, and his father's body already gone, taken to the morgue for a cursory examination that found exactly what it was meant to find. Heart attack, natural causes, no autopsy required. The doctor, Luca said. Is he still alive? No, Vincent had him killed 3 months later. Couldn't risk loose ends. Convenient. Vincent was thorough. I'll give him that. Enzo reached out, hesitated, then rested his hand on Luca's shoulder. The touch was careful, almost tentative. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. I know that. But I am. More than you'll ever understand. Luca opened his eyes, looked at the hand on his shoulder, then at Enzo's face. Guilt lived there, carved deep. But something else, too. Something that looked almost like hope. I don't forgive you, Luca said quietly. I'm not asking you to. Good. Because I don't think I can. I know. Enzo's hand fell away. But I'm hoping someday you might. The weeks blurred together. Luca learned the architecture of the criminal organization that had killed his father, names, hierarchies, operations, learned which cops were bought, which politicians looked the other way, which lawyers specialized in making evidence disappear, learned how deep the rot went, how many people had profited from his father's silence. But he also learned about Enzo, learned that he'd taken over the family at 28, after his father died in a shooting that Enzo still suspected was orchestrated by Vincent to clear the path for his own son. Learned that he'd spent the past 4 years trying to salvage something decent from an empire built on violence. Learned that he donated to charities under fake names, that he'd quietly shut down 3 human trafficking operations, that he still carried a photo of his younger sister who'd overdosed on drugs supplied by one of his own distributors. Why stay? Luca asked one night. They were in Enzo's apartment again, going through financial records spread across the dining table. If you hate what the family does, why not just walk away? And do what? Let someone worse take over? Let everything my father built, the legitimate parts, the parts that actually help people, get torn apart by vultures? Enzo rubbed his eyes, exhausted. I stay because if I don't, 100 people lose their jobs. Community centers close. Kids who need programs lose them. The good gets destroyed along with the bad. So you're a martyr. I'm a coward. Enzo's smile was bitter. A martyr would have the courage to burn it all down. I just keep trying to save pieces while the whole structure rots. Luca wanted to argue, but he understood the logic. Had seen it in his father's work. Systems so corrupt that dismantling them meant destroying the innocent people caught in the machinery. Antonio had written about it, agonized over it, tried to find ways to expose the rot without hurting the vulnerable, and it had gotten him killed. We need leverage, Luca said, changing the subject before his thoughts spiraled somewhere dark. Evidence that's current, actionable, something that can't be buried or ignored. Already working on it. Enzo pulled a laptop toward him, opened an encrypted folder. I've been documenting everything for the past 2 years, shipments, payments, communications, building a case from the inside. For what? You can't exactly go to the police. No, but I can go to the FBI. Enzo glanced at him. There's an agent I've been cultivating, clean, ambitious, hungry to make a name for herself. If I can give her enough to justify a full investigation, she'll move on it. And you'll go down with everyone else. Probably. Enzo didn't seem bothered by the prospect. But at least it'll be over. At least the operation your father died trying to expose will finally be destroyed. Luca stared at him. You're serious. You'd actually turn yourself in. If it means finishing what Antonio started? Yes. Why? Because I'm tired, Luca. Tired of being part of something that destroys lives. Tired of waking up and seeing blood on my hands, even when I haven't pulled the trigger myself. Tired of... He stopped, looked away. Of being the kind of man your father would have despised. The honesty was brutal. Luca felt it lodge somewhere under his ribs, sharp and uncomfortable. He'd spent weeks hating Enzo, seeing him as the enemy, the obstacle between himself and justice. But the man sitting across from him wasn't a monster. He was just broken, guilty, trying desperately to atone for sins he couldn't undo. My father wouldn't have despised you, Luca heard himself say. He would have been disappointed. There's a difference. Enzo's laugh was quiet, pained. Not sure which is worse. Disappointment means he thought you could be better. Despising you would mean he'd given up. Luca leaned back in his chair. My dad didn't give up on people easily. No, he didn't. Enzo met his eyes. He gave me more chances than I deserved, right up until the end. They sat in silence for a while, the laptop screen casting blue light across the table. Outside, Chicago hummed with late-night energy. Cars, voices, the distant wail of sirens. The city moved on, indifferent to the small drama of two men trying to make sense of tragedy. I need to tell you something, Enzo said eventually. About the night you got mugged. About why I was there. Luca's attention sharpened. I've been wondering about that. I've had people watching you for years, making sure you stayed safe, that no one from the organization got curious about Antonio Virelli's son. Enzo's expression was carefully neutral. That night, one of my guys called to say 3 street thugs were following you. I was 6 blocks away, so I came myself. Why? Because I wasn't going to let anyone else handle it. Not when it came to you. That's not what I'm asking. Luca leaned forward. Why did you step in yourself? You could have sent someone. Could have let your guy handle it. Why did you need to be there? Enzo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough. Because I've been watching you from a distance for 7 years, making sure you were okay, telling myself it was enough. But that night, when I got the call that you were in danger, I couldn't stay away anymore. I needed to see you, needed to know you were real and alive, and... He stopped abruptly. And what? Luca pressed. And nothing like the ghost I'd built in my head. Enzo stood up, moved to the window. I'd convinced myself that protecting you from afar was noble, that I was honoring your father's memory by keeping you safe. But really, I was just avoiding the guilt, avoiding having to face what I'd done. Until I showed up in that alley. Until you told me your name and looked at me with your father's eyes and made it impossible to keep pretending. Luca's pulse kicked up. There was something in Enzo's voice, something underneath the guilt and regret, something that sounded almost like, no. He shut that thought down before it could fully form. This was about justice, about his father, about making right what had been wrong for 7 years. Nothing else. But when Enzo turned from the window and their eyes met, Luca felt it again. That pull, magnetic and terrifying, drawing him toward a man he should hate, a man who was complicit in his father's murder, a man who looked at him like he was both salvation and damnation wrapped in one impossible package. I should go, Luca said, standing up too fast. It's late. I can drive you. I'll take the train. He gathered his things, shoved them in his bag. I need to think. Luca, I'll call you tomorrow. We can go over the rest of the evidence then. He was at the door when Enzo caught his arm, spun him around. They were close again, too close, and Luca could see gold flecks in Enzo's dark eyes, could feel heat radiating off him. What are you running from? Enzo asked quietly. I'm not running. Then stay. Why? Because Enzo's grip tightened on his arm. Because being alone with this is killing me, and you're the only person who understands. The only person who knows the truth. That's not a good reason. No, but it's an honest one. They stood there, caught in a moment that could tip either direction. Luca could feel his heart hammering, could feel something dangerous building in his chest. He should leave. Should put distance between himself and this man who represented every complicated, painful thing in his life. But he didn't. One drink, he said instead. Then I'm gone. Enzo's smile was small, sad, grateful. One drink. They ended up on the balcony, whiskey in hand, watching the city glitter below them. The alcohol burned going down, loosened something tight in Luca's chest. He wasn't much of a drinker, couldn't afford to be on a student's budget, but tonight felt like the kind of night that required chemical assistance. "Tell me about him," Enzo said after a while. "Your father." Not the journalist, not the investigator, the man. Luca considered the question, took another sip. He was loud, laughed at his own jokes, usually before he finished telling them. Made terrible puns. Burned every meal he tried to cook, but kept trying anyway because he was stubborn as hell. Sounds like someone I know. I'm not stubborn. You climbed into a car with a crime boss because he said he had information. Twice. That's either brave or stubborn, and I'm leaning towards stubborn. Or stupid. That too. Enzo's smile was warmer now, easier. The whiskey was working on him too. But I'm grateful for it. Luca looked at him, at the way the city lights caught in his hair, at the lines of his face that were starting to relax. Why did you really give me that evidence? I told you, not the official reason, the real one. Enzo was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, the words came slow, like he was pulling them from somewhere deep. Because I'm tired of carrying it alone. Because every time I look at those files, I see your father's handwriting and remember that he trusted me and I failed him. Because he turned to face Luca fully. Because when I saw you in that alley, looking scared and angry and so goddamn alive, I realized I'd do anything to keep you that way, even if it means destroying myself. The confession hung in the air, raw and true. Luca's breath caught. You can't say things like that. Why not? Because I'm supposed to hate you. Because you're the enemy. Because your father would want you to be happy, to be safe, to live a full life. Enzo's voice was fierce now. He died trying to give you that. The least I can do is try to finish what he started. By what? Protecting me? I don't need protection. Everyone needs protection, Luca. Even people who pretend they don't. Luca set down his glass before he could throw it. Stop acting like you know me. I've watched you for 7 years. I know you better than you think. Watching isn't knowing. Then let me know you. Enzo moved closer, close enough that Luca could count his eyelashes if he wanted. Really know you, not the ghost, not the obligation. You. This was dangerous territory. Luca could feel it, the way the air had changed between them, charged with something that had nothing to do with guilt or revenge or his father's memory. This was something else, something new and terrifying and completely inappropriate given everything that stood between them. I should go, Luca said again, but his feet didn't move. You keep saying that. I mean it this time. Do you? No. The truth was he didn't want to leave. Didn't want to go back to his empty apartment and his half-finished degree and his life that felt small and meaningless in the wake of everything he'd learned. He wanted to stay here, in this moment, with this man who saw him as something more than Antonio Virelli's orphaned son. But wanting was dangerous. Wanting led to mistakes. And Luca had made enough of those already. He pulled back, put space between them. I need time to process all of this, to figure out what comes next. Of course. Enzo's expression shuddered, professional again. I'll drive you home. I'll take the train. Luca, please, I need to be alone right now. Enzo studied him, then nodded. All right, but text me when you get home, so I know you're safe. I'm not your responsibility. Maybe not, but I'm making you one anyway. Luca left before he could say something stupid, before he could lean into the warmth Enzo offered, before he could let himself believe that maybe, possibly, something good could come from this disaster. The train ride home was long and cold and gave him too much time to think about his father, about Enzo, about the evidence sitting in his bag and the choice that lay ahead. He could take it to the FBI himself, could finish what his father started without Enzo's help, could watch the whole organization burn and maybe, if he was lucky, see Enzo go down with it. That would be justice, clean, clear, uncomplicated. But justice didn't account for the way Enzo looked at him like he was something precious, didn't account for the guilt that ate at the man from the inside out, didn't account for the fact that maybe, just maybe, Enzo was trying to be better than what his family had made him. And it definitely didn't account for the terrifying realization that Luca was starting to care about him. Luca lasted 3 days before the silence became unbearable. 3 days of going through the motions, class, work, sleep, while his mind churned through everything he'd learned. 3 days of staring at his phone, wanting to call Enzo and hating himself for wanting it. 3 days of pretending he could go back to the person he'd been before that night in the alley. On the fourth day, he found the envelope. It was slipped under his apartment door sometime in the early morning, plain manila with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and dark, clearly taken from a distance. It showed Luca and Enzo on the balcony of Enzo's apartment, drinks in hand, standing close enough that it could have been innocent or could have been something else entirely. On the back, someone had written in block letters, "He killed your father. Why are you fucking him?" Luca's hands shook as he flipped the photo over again, studying it. The angle suggested it had been taken from a building across the street, probably with a telephoto lens. Professional work. Someone had been watching them, documenting their meetings, and now they wanted Luca to know. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it without thinking. "Who is this?" "Someone who thinks you should know what you're getting into." The voice was male, middle-aged, with an accent Luca couldn't quite place. "Enzo Moretti is not your friend, Mr. Virelli. He's using you." "For what?" "Redemption. Forgiveness. Whatever helps him sleep at night." A pause. "But men like him don't change. They just get better at hiding what they are." "What do you want?" "I want you to stop trusting him, stop helping him, and definitely stop letting him into your bed before you end up like your father, dead because you got too close to the truth." The line went dead. Luca stood there, heart pounding, staring at the photo. Someone was watching him. Someone knew about his connection to Enzo. Someone wanted to drive a wedge between them, and Luca had no idea why. He called Enzo. "Luca?" Enzo picked up on the first ring, sounding slightly out of breath. "Is everything all right?" "Someone left a photo under my door. Of us. From your balcony." Silence. Then, "I'm sending a car. Don't leave your apartment." Enzo, Don't argue. Just stay put until I get there." 20 minutes later, Enzo was at his door with two other men Luca didn't recognize. They swept the apartment efficiently, checking windows, looking for cameras or bugs, while Enzo examined the photo with an expression that had gone completely cold. "Who took this?" Luca asked. "Someone with access to the building across from mine. Someone who wants you to distrust me." Enzo handed the photo to one of his men. "Run this. I want to know what camera was used, where it was purchased, everything." The man nodded and disappeared. Enzo turned to Luca. "Pack a bag. You're staying with me until we figure out who's behind this." "Like hell I am." "This isn't negotiable." "Everything is negotiable." Luca crossed his arms. "I'm not running scared because someone took a creepy photo." "They called you too, didn't they? That's how you knew to check your door." Luca hesitated. "How did you—" "Because it's what I would do. Send something physical to rattle you, then follow up with a voice to reinforce the message." Enzo moved closer, his voice dropping. "What did they say?" "That you're using me. That I shouldn't trust you." Luca met his eyes. "That I'll end up dead like my father." Something flickered in Enzo's expression. Anger, maybe. Or fear. "And do you believe them?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Then believe this. I would never hurt you. Never. Whatever else I am, whatever I've done, that's the one truth you can count on." "That's what someone who's using me would say." "Yes, it is." Enzo didn't look away. "But it's also what someone who's telling the truth would say. So you have to decide which one I am." Luca wanted to push him away, to retreat back into the safety of anger and suspicion. But standing there in his crappy apartment with Enzo looking at him like he was the only thing in the world that mattered, Luca found he couldn't. "Why do you care so much?" The question came out quieter than intended. "Really, strip away the guilt and the obligation and my father's ghost. Why do you actually care what happens to me?" Enzo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because when I look at you, I see everything I could have been if I'd made different choices. You're good, Luca. Despite everything life has thrown at you, despite losing your father, despite finding out the truth about how he died, you're still good, still fighting for what's right. And He stopped, jaw working. "I want to protect that, even if it means protecting you from me." The honesty of it hit Luca square in the chest. He'd spent weeks trying to categorize Enzo as villain or victim, enemy or ally, and the man kept refusing to fit into any neat box. He was complicated, broken, trying desperately to atone for sins that couldn't be undone. And somehow, impossibly, Luca was starting to care about him anyway. 1 week, Luca said finally. I'll stay with you for 1 week while you figure out who's watching us. After that, I'm coming back here whether it's safe or not. 1 week, Enzo agreed. That's all I'm asking. Luca packed a bag while Enzo's remaining man checked the hallway. The whole thing felt surreal, leaving his apartment with a crime boss's bodyguard, climbing into an armored car, being driven through Chicago like he was someone important enough to warrant protection. His father would have had a field day with the irony. Enzo's building had security. Luca hadn't noticed the first time. Cameras, coded locks, guards who nodded respectfully as they passed. They took a private elevator straight to the top floor, and Enzo unlocked the apartment with both a key card and a fingerprint scanner. Paranoid much? Luca asked. Cautious. There's a difference. Enzo set down Luca's bag. Guest room is down the hall. Bathrooms attached. Make yourself at home. This is temporary. I know. I'm serious, Enzo. 1 week. I heard you the first time. Enzo moved to the windows, pulled the curtains closed. But while you're here, there are rules. You don't go out alone. You don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize. And if anything feels off, anything at all, you tell me immediately. I'm not a child. No. But you're a target now. Enzo turned to face him. Whoever sent that photo knows you're important to me. That makes you leverage. And people in my world don't hesitate to use leverage however they need to. The implications of that settled over Luca like cold water. So by trying to protect me, you've made me more vulnerable. Yes, no point in denying it. Which is why I'm going to fix this before it gets worse. How? By finding out who's behind it and making sure they understand that touching you means dying slowly. The casual violence in Enzo's tone should have been frightening. Instead, it was almost reassuring, evidence that he meant what he said about protection. Luca dropped his bag in the guest room and tried not to notice how expensive everything was. King-sized bed, Egyptian cotton sheets, a view of the city that probably cost more per month than Luca made in a year. The bathroom had one of those rainfall showers and heated floors, and about 6 different types of fancy soap. He unpacked his toiletries next to them and felt like a kid playing dress-up in his father's clothes. When he came back out, Enzo was in the kitchen making coffee. The domesticity of it was jarring. This man who ordered executions and ran criminal enterprises, measuring grounds and heating water like a normal person. Want some? Enzo asked. Yeah, thanks. They stood at the counter drinking coffee in silence. Outside, the city was waking up, traffic building, people heading to jobs and lives that didn't involve crime bosses and threatening photographs. Luca wondered what it would be like to be one of those people again, if he ever had been. Tell me about the FBI agent, he said finally. The one you're working with. Enzo glanced at him. Her name is Sarah Chen, Organized Crime Division. She's been building a case against my family for 3 years, but she doesn't have enough for indictments. Yet. And you're going to give it to her. Eventually, when the time is right. Enzo took a sip of coffee. But I need to make sure all the pieces are in place first, that the evidence is airtight, that the people I want to protect are clear before everything comes down. People like who? People who work for me but aren't part of the criminal side. Legitimate employees, community program staff, business partners who had no idea what else was going on. Enzo set down his mug. When this goes public, a lot of innocent people are going to suffer. I'm trying to minimize that. Noble of you. Not noble, just basic human decency. Enzo's smile was bitter. Though I suppose that's a low bar for someone in my position. Luca studied him, this man who carried guilt like a second skin. Do you ever wish you'd made different choices? Gone a different direction? Every single day. Then why didn't you? Because by the time I realized what I'd become, I was already in too deep. Had too many people depending on me, too many obligations I couldn't walk away from. Enzo looked at him. My father died when I was 25, left me a legitimate construction business and an illegitimate empire. I tried to separate them, to just run the legal side, but Vincent wouldn't let me. Said it was my responsibility to the family, to our legacy, to everyone who'd built this thing over generations. So you gave in. So I was weak. No excuses. I told myself I could change things from the inside, could make the organization better, but all I really did was become complicit in everything I claimed to oppose. Until my father showed up. Until your father showed up, Enzo agreed quietly, and made me see exactly what I'd become. They finished their coffee in silence. Then Enzo made breakfast. Actual breakfast with eggs and toast and fruit. And Luca tried not to think about how easy it would be to get used to this, to having someone take care of him, to feeling safe in a world that had never felt particularly safe. After breakfast, Enzo disappeared into his office to make calls. Luca wandered the apartment, looking at books and art and photographs that told the story of a life more complicated than he'd imagined. There was a picture of a young girl, maybe 8 years old, laughing at the camera. Enzo's sister, probably, the one who'd died. He found Enzo's bedroom by accident, drawn by an open door. The space was surprisingly sparse. Bed, dresser, nightstand. No clutter. No personal touches except for a single framed photograph on the nightstand. Luca moved closer, curious. It was his father. Antonio Virelli, younger than Luca remembered him, standing in what looked like a park. He was smiling, genuinely happy, and written on the back in Enzo's handwriting, "The good man I failed." Luca's throat closed up. He set the photo down carefully and backed out of the room, not sure what to do with the realization that Enzo had been carrying this guilt so tangibly, so deliberately, for all these years. "Luca?" Enzo's voice came from down the hall. "Can you come here?" He found Enzo in his office, laptop open, expression grim. "What's wrong?" "I know who sent the photo." Enzo turned the screen toward him. On it was a surveillance image of a man in his 50s, gray hair, expensive suit. Marco Benedetti. He was Vincent's second in command. When I took over and started changing things, he wasn't happy about it. So he's trying to undermine you. He's trying to remind me that I'm not untouchable, that he knows my weaknesses. Enzo's voice was hard. And apparently he's decided you're one of them. What does he want? Power, control. For me to step aside and let him run things the old way. Enzo closed the laptop. He's been making moves for months trying to gather support among the old guard. This photo is his way of saying he's serious. So what do? We don't do anything. I handle Marco. How? Enzo looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, Luca saw the crime boss beneath the guilt. Cold, calculated, dangerous. However I need to. You're going to kill him. If necessary. Enzo. He threatened you, Luca. Sent people to watch you, to photograph you, to make you feel unsafe. In my world, that has consequences. In your world, everything has violent consequences. That's the problem. What would you have me do? Ask nicely for him to stop? Negotiate with a man who sees compassion as weakness? Enzo stood up, agitation making him pace. I'm trying to dismantle this organization from the inside, trying to build something better. But I can't do that if people like Marco are undermining me at every turn. So you'll kill him, and someone else will take his place, and the cycle continues. Not if I remove the entire structure. Not if I give the FBI enough to bring everyone down at once. And what happens to you when that happens? I go to prison. Probably for the rest of my life. Enzo said it calmly, like he was discussing the weather. But the operation ends. The weapons smuggling stops. The corruption gets exposed. And maybe, I finally pay for what I did to your father. Luca's chest felt tight. That's not justice. That's just martyrdom with extra steps. Maybe they're the same thing. They're not. Luca moved closer. Justice is about making things right. What you're talking about is punishment. Isn't that what you want, for me to be punished? The question hung between them, sharp and painful. A month ago, Luca would have said yes without hesitation. Would have wanted to see Enzo suffer the way his father had suffered, the way he'd suffered in the years since. But now, standing in this office looking at a man who was already punishing himself more effectively than any court ever could, Luca wasn't sure. I want the truth, he said finally. I want the people responsible for my father's death to face consequences. But I don't want you to destroy yourself in the process. Why not? Because, Luca stopped, struggling with words. Because I think you're more useful alive than martyred. Because dismantling this organization means something only if you're around to make sure something better replaces it. Because what? Because I don't want you to die, all right? The admission came out frustrated, almost angry. Is that what you wanted to hear? That I've somehow started caring about whether you lived through this? Enzo crossed the space between them in 2 strides, got close enough that Luca could see his pulse jumping in his throat. Say that again. Which part? The part where you care. Luca's breath caught. They were too close again, the way they'd been on the balcony, the way they kept ending up despite every logical reason to maintain distance. I care. Even though I shouldn't, even though it's stupid and complicated and probably a mistake, I care what happens to you. Luca, Enzo's hand came up, cupped his jaw. The touch was gentle, questioning. Tell me to stop. Stop what? This. Enzo's thumb brushed across his cheekbone. Whatever this is, because if we cross this line, there's no going back. And I need you to be sure. Luca should have pulled away. Should have remembered all the reasons this was wrong. His father's death, Enzo's complicity, the impossible gulf between who they were and what they represented. Should have protected himself from getting hurt. But he'd never been good at should. I'm not sure about anything, he said honestly. Except that I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this. Whatever this is. Enzo's eyes searched his face. If we do this, I need you to understand something. I'm not a good man, Luca. I've done terrible things, and being with me won't change that. I'm not trying to change you. Then what are you trying to do? I don't know. Luca's voice dropped to a whisper. Maybe I'm just trying to feel something other than angry and lost and alone. That's not a good reason to... It's the only reason I have. Enzo closed his eyes briefly, like he was fighting with himself. When he opened them again, the decision was written there. Then I'm a weaker man than I thought. He kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tentative or questioning. It was desperate and hungry, and tasted like coffee and regret and 7 years of pent-up guilt finally finding an outlet. Luca kissed back with equal desperation, hands fisting in Enzo's shirt, all the anger and grief and confusion channeling into this one contact point. This was a mistake. Had to be. Kissing the man whose family had killed his father, letting himself want someone who represented everything wrong in his life. But Luca had spent weeks fighting logic that told him to hate Enzo, fighting the growing realization that guilt and complicity weren't the same as malice, that people could be both terrible and good, that the world was more complicated than he'd wanted to believe. And right now, with Enzo's hands in his hair and his back pressed against the desk, Luca didn't want to think about complications. They broke apart breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. Enzo's hands were shaking. We shouldn't have done that, he said. Probably not. This is a bad idea. Definitely. I don't want to hurt you. Too late for that. Luca pulled back enough to meet his eyes. You hurt me the day you chose your family over my father. Everything after that is just damage control. Enzo flinched. Then why? Because I'm choosing to be here anyway. Because I'm choosing to believe that people can be more than their worst decisions. Luca's voice was steady now, certain. Because my father spent his life believing in redemption, and maybe I inherited that from him. Your father would hate this, hate us. Maybe. Or maybe he'd understand that people are complicated and life is messy, and sometimes the right thing looks nothing like what you expected it to. Luca stepped back, putting space between them. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more lies. No more half-truths or protection. If we're doing this, whatever this is, I need complete honesty about your family, about what you're planning, about everything. Even if the truth hurts? Especially if it hurts. Enzo studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Complete honesty, I promise. Good. Luca's pulse was still racing, adrenaline and desire mixing into something that felt dangerous and electric. So be honest now. What are you planning to do about Marco? I'm going to meet with him, try to negotiate first, see if there's a way to resolve this without violence. And if there isn't, then I'll do what needs to be done. Enzo's expression hardened. But I'll try every other option first. For you. Not for me. For yourself. For the person you're trying to become. Same thing, isn't it? No. Luca moved to the window, looked out at Chicago, stretching below them. Doing it for me means you're still defining yourself by other people's expectations. Doing it for yourself means you actually believe you can be better. Enzo came to stand beside him, close but not touching. What if I can't be? Then we figure it out together. Luca turned to look at him. But you have to actually try. Not just go through the motions or set yourself up for martyrdom. Really try. I don't know if I know how. Then learn. Luca's voice softened. You said my father believed in redemption. So do I. But redemption isn't passive. It's work. Hard, ugly, uncomfortable work. And you don't get to skip to the ending where you're forgiven without putting in the effort. Enzo was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right. I'll try. Really try. Good. They stood there together, watching the city wake up below them. Luca knew this was dangerous. Trusting Enzo, caring about him, letting himself fall into something that could destroy them both. But he'd spent 7 years playing it safe, keeping his head down, surviving instead of living. Maybe it was time to take a risk, even if that risk came with a crime boss's guilt and a dead father's ghost, and the impossible task of turning revenge into something that looked almost like forgiveness. The meeting with Marco was set for 2 days later, in a restaurant that Enzo controlled. Neutral ground that wasn't actually neutral at all, but at least it was public enough that open violence was unlikely. Luca wanted to go. Enzo refused. Absolutely not. He's using me as leverage against you. I should be there. Which is exactly why you can't be. Enzo was packing a gun, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. Marco seeing you would confirm that he's gotten under my skin. That you matter. That makes you a bigger target. I'm already a target. Not like you would be if he saw us together, saw how I look at you. Enzo's voice dropped. I can't protect you if I'm worrying about you the entire meeting. So you're just going to leave me here, with 3 armed guards and a panic button that goes directly to my phone, yes. Luca wanted to argue more, but he could see the fear beneath Enzo's determination. This was how Enzo showed love. Through protection, through control, through making sure the people he cared about were safe, even if it meant shutting them out. Promise me you'll be careful, Luca said instead. Always am. Promise me you'll try to negotiate before resorting to violence. I will. And promise me you'll come back. Enzo stopped what he was doing, turned to face him fully. I promise. He kissed Luca goodbye like it might be the last time, thorough and desperate and tinged with fear. Then he left, and Luca was alone in the apartment with guards he didn't know and time that moved too slowly. He tried to distract himself, worked on a paper for school, made lunch he didn't eat, paced the apartment until one of the guards asked if he was okay. But his mind kept circling back to Enzo walking into a meeting with a man who wanted him dead or diminished, kept imagining all the ways it could go wrong. 3 hours later, his phone rang. Enzo's number. Tell me you're okay, Luca said instead of hello. I'm okay. Enzo sounded tired. Marco and I came to an understanding. What kind of understanding? The kind where he backs off and I don't kill him. He wasn't happy about it, but he's smart enough to know when he's outmaneuvered. Relief flooded through Luca. So it's over? For now. But this isn't the end, Luca. There will always be someone else. Someone who sees my reforms as weakness, who wants to go back to the old ways. Then you deal with them too, without killing them. I'll try. A pause. I'm coming home. You want me to pick up dinner? Home. Enzo had called his apartment home, like Luca belonged there. Like this was already something more than temporary protection. Yeah, Luca said, throat tight. That sounds good. Enzo came back 2 hours later with Thai food and exhaustion written into every line of his body. They ate in the living room, not talking much, just existing in the same space. And when Enzo's head dropped onto Luca's shoulder halfway through a movie neither of them was watching, Luca let him stay there. This was dangerous. This was complicated. This was probably the stupidest thing Luca had ever done. But for the first time in 7 years, he felt something other than lost. The 1 week Luca had promised turned into 2, then 3. He told himself it was practical. Safer to stay with Enzo while Marco's threat still lingered. Easier to work on the evidence together, more efficient than commuting back and forth. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He didn't want to leave. They fell into a rhythm that felt dangerously domestic. Enzo would wake first, make coffee, work in his office, while Luca attended online classes from the guest room that had stopped feeling like a guest room. They'd have lunch together when Enzo's schedule allowed, dinner almost every night. Sometimes they'd talk about the case, about Antonio's evidence and the FBI agent and the timeline for bringing everything down. Other times they'd talk about nothing, books, music, the stupid things people did in the news. And sometimes they wouldn't talk at all. Sometimes Enzo would pull Luca onto the couch and kiss him until neither of them could think straight, until the past didn't matter and the future was too far away to worry about. Those moments were the most dangerous because they made Luca forget why this was complicated, why falling for Enzo Moretti was a betrayal of everything his father had died for. But he was falling anyway. Had been since that first kiss in the office, maybe even before that. And the worst part was that Enzo was falling too. "I need to show you something," Enzo said one morning over coffee. He looked nervous, which was unusual enough to make Luca pay attention. "Something I should have shown you weeks ago." He led Luca to his office, unlocked a safe hidden behind a painting, and pulled out a small box. Inside was a flash drive. "What's on it?" Luca asked. "The rest of the truth." Enzo handed it to him. "About your father's last days, about what really happened." Luca's stomach dropped. "I thought you told me everything." "I told you what I knew from my perspective. This is what your father recorded before he died. His own words, in case something happened to him." The flash drive felt heavy in Luca's palm, weighted with implications he wasn't sure he was ready for. "Why didn't you give me this before?" "Because I was a coward. Because I knew once you heard his voice, heard him talk about what he was planning." Enzo's jaw tightened. "It would make everything more real. And I wasn't ready to face that." "But you're ready now." "No, but you deserve the truth anyway." Luca plugged the drive into Enzo's laptop with shaking hands. There was a single video file, dated 3 days before Antonio Virelli died. He clicked play. His father's face filled the screen, and Luca's breath caught. He looked tired but determined, sitting in what Luca recognized as his old office. The background was familiar: bookshelves, framed articles, the desk lamp with the broken switch that never quite turned all the way off. "If you're watching this, I'm probably dead." Antonio's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "And if Enzo Moretti kept his word, this drive ended up with my son. Luca, if you're seeing this, I need you to understand some things." Luca's throat closed up. He felt Enzo's hand on his shoulder, steadying. "I've been investigating a weapons smuggling operation run by the Moretti family for the past year. I have enough evidence to bring down the entire organization. Names, dates, financial records, everything. But Vincent Moretti found out, and now I have a choice to make. I can publish the story and probably get killed for it, or I can walk away and let these people continue destroying lives." Antonio paused, rubbed his eyes. He looked older than Luca remembered, worn down by the weight of what he knew. "I'm choosing to publish. Not because I have a death wish, but because staying silent makes me complicit, makes me part of the problem. And I can't look my son in the eye knowing I had the power to stop something evil and chose not to use it." Luca's vision blurred. "But here's the thing, kiddo." Antonio leaned closer to the camera, and his expression softened. "I don't want you to carry this forward. Don't want you to feel like you have to finish what I started or avenge my death or any of that heroic bullshit. I'm making this choice for me, not for you. Your only job is to live, to be happy, to build a life that isn't defined by my mistakes or my crusades." "Dad," Luca whispered, even though the man on screen couldn't hear him. "I've made arrangements, given the evidence to someone I trust, Enzo Moretti. Yes, I know, he's part of the family I'm trying to expose. But he's different. He doesn't want this life. And I believe, I have to believe, that eventually he'll find the courage to do the right thing." Luca looked up at Enzo, who was staring at the screen with an expression of pure pain. "If something happens to me, Enzo's going to protect you. It's part of our deal, and I know you're going to be angry about that, going to hate that you're being looked after by someone connected to my death. But Luca, listen to me. Don't let anger consume you. Don't let my death become the defining feature of your life." Antonio's eyes were wet now, and Luca realized his father had been crying when he made this recording, had known he was saying goodbye. "I love you, kiddo, more than anything in this world. And if there's an afterlife, I'll be up there proud as hell of whoever you become. Just promise me one thing. Promise me you'll choose life over revenge. Choose happiness over justice. Choose to be the kind of man who builds things instead of tearing them down." The video ended. Luca sat in silence, tears streaming down his face, trying to process what he'd just heard. His father had known he was going to die, had chosen it anyway, had specifically told Luca not to pursue revenge, not to carry forward the fight. And Luca had been doing exactly the opposite. "I'm sorry," Enzo said quietly. "I should have shown you this sooner." "He chose you." Luca's voice was rough. "Out of everyone he could have trusted with this, he chose you. He saw something in me that I'm still trying to find. He saw who you could be. Who you are when you're not trying to live up to your family's expectations." Luca wiped his eyes, turned to face Enzo. "He was right about you. I failed him. You're still here. Still trying. That counts for something." "Does it?" Enzo's voice cracked. "I let him die, Luca. Watched it happen and did nothing because I was too weak to choose him over my family. How does trying now make up for that?" "It doesn't. Nothing can make up for that." Luca grabbed Enzo's face, forced him to meet his eyes. "But spending the rest of your life punishing yourself doesn't bring him back either. It just means 2 lives get destroyed instead of 1. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying my father wanted me to choose life, to be happy, and I think—" Luca's breath shook. "I think maybe he'd understand that finding happiness with you isn't a betrayal. It's exactly what he asked me to do." Enzo pulled him close, and they held each other while the video played on loop in Luca's mind. His father's voice, steady and sure, even in the face of death, telling him to let go, to move forward, to choose love over hate. It should have been impossible, should have gone against every instinct for justice and revenge that Luca had spent years building. But standing there in Enzo's arms, listening to his father's blessing from beyond the grave, Luca felt something shift inside him. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about excusing what happened. Maybe it was about refusing to let the past destroy the future. They spent the rest of the day processing the video, talking through what it meant. Enzo showed Luca the deal he'd made with Antonio. Protection for Luca in exchange for keeping the evidence safe. A promise to eventually use it to dismantle the organization from within. "He believed in you," Luca said. "Even knowing what your family was, what you were part of, he believed you could change." "I've been trying. For 7 years I've been trying to live up to that belief." "I know." Luca's hand found Enzo's across the table. "And I think you're closer than you realize." That night, Luca moved his things from the guest room to Enzo's bedroom. It was a small gesture, symbolic more than practical, but it felt like crossing a threshold, acknowledging that this wasn't temporary, that whatever was happening between them was real and worth pursuing despite the complications. Enzo watched him unpack with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know. If you're just trying to honor your father's wishes—" "This isn't about my father." Luca turned to face him. "This is about me choosing you, choosing us, whatever that means." "It means you're going to get hurt." "Probably, but I've been hurt before. I survived." "Luca, stop trying to talk me out of this." Luca crossed the room, got close enough to feel Enzo's breath on his face. "I'm an adult. I'm making an informed decision, and I'm choosing to be here with you, knowing exactly who you are and what you've done." Enzo's hands came up to frame his face, thumbs brushing away tears Luca hadn't realized were falling. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." They kissed, and it was different from before. Not desperate or hungry, but slow and deliberate. A promise instead of a question. Luca let himself sink into it, into the feeling of being wanted and held and chosen despite everything. Later, lying in Enzo's bed with moonlight streaming through the windows, Luca felt something close to peace for the first time in years. "Tell me about your sister," he said into the darkness. Enzo went still beside him. "What?" "Your sister, the one in the photo. I want to know about her." Silence stretched out long enough that Luca thought maybe he'd pushed too far. Then Enzo's voice came, quiet and rough. "Her name was Sophia. She was 10 years younger than me, basically my responsibility after our parents died. Smartest person I ever knew, full scholarship to Northwestern, double major in philosophy and political science. She was going to change the world. What happened? She found out what the family really did, what I really did, and she couldn't handle it. Enzo's voice was hollow. Started using to cope. I tried to get her help, put her in rehab 3 times, but it never stuck. Then one day she overdosed on products supplied by one of our own distributors. I'm sorry. I killed her. Not directly, but Enzo's breath shuddered. She died because I chose this life, because I stayed part of something that destroys people. Luca rolled over, pressed against Enzo's side. You didn't force the drugs into her system. I might as well have. I knew what we were doing to communities, to families, knew people were dying, and I kept operating, kept profiting, because it was easier than walking away. So you're trying to walk away now? 7 years too late. Better late than never. Enzo's laugh was bitter. Is it? Or is it just me trying to feel better about myself without actually making amends? It's both. Luca propped himself up on one elbow, looked down at Enzo's face in the moonlight. But that doesn't make it meaningless. Change is still change, even when it comes from selfish motivations. You're too forgiving. I'm really not. Ask me how I feel about your uncle, about the people who actually killed my father. How do you feel? Like I could watch them burn and not feel a thing. The honesty of it surprised Luca. But you're not them, and punishing you for their sins doesn't bring anyone back. Enzo pulled him down, kissed him hard. I don't know how you do it, how you separate me from what my family is. Because you're already doing it yourself. Every day you work toward dismantling this, every choice you make that goes against what Vincent wanted, that's you separating yourself. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in weeks, Luca didn't dream about his father's death. The next morning brought news that shattered their fragile peace. Enzo's phone rang at 6 a.m., and Luca woke to him speaking in rapid Italian, voice tense. When he hung up, his expression was carved from stone. What's wrong? Luca asked. Marco's dead. Shot 3 times in his car last night. Luca sat up. Did you? No, but someone wanted it to look like I did. Enzo was already moving, pulling on clothes. This is a setup. Someone's trying to start a war. Who? I don't know yet, but whoever it is, they're smart. Marco's people are going to assume I ordered the hit, and they're going to retaliate. So what do we do? We? Enzo turned to look at him. You don't do anything. You stay here where it's safe. Like hell I do. Luca, this is about to get very dangerous. If there's a war coming, you can't be anywhere near me. You don't get to make that decision. Actually, I do. Enzo's voice was hard. I'm not letting you get caught in crossfire because of my enemies. Your enemies already know about me, already sent me threatening photos. Staying away from you doesn't make me safer. It just makes me isolated. Better isolated than dead. Better together than apart. Luca stood up, moved into Enzo's space. We're in this together now. You don't get to push me away when things get hard. Enzo's jaw clenched. I'm trying to protect you. I know, but I don't need protection. I need you to trust me to make my own choices. They stared at each other, war happening in the silence. Finally, Enzo closed his eyes, exhaled hard. Fine. But you follow my rules. You stay close. You do what I say. And if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. No arguments, Luca agreed. The next 3 days were chaos. Enzo worked constantly, making calls, holding meetings, trying to prevent Marco's lieutenants from retaliating while simultaneously investigating who'd actually killed him. Luca watched it unfold, saw the crime boss emerge fully for the first time, commanding, strategic, ruthless when necessary. It was terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. It's Paolo, Enzo said on the 4th day. They were in his office, surrounded by files and surveillance photos. Marco's nephew. He's been trying to consolidate power for months, but Marco wouldn't step aside, so he killed him and blamed me. Why you? Because if Marco's people go to war with me, Paolo can swoop in and unite both factions under his leadership. Classic power play. So what are you going to do? Prove I didn't order the hit. Show Marco's lieutenants the truth before this escalates. How? Enzo pulled up surveillance footage on his laptop. Paolo was sloppy, Use people I have cameras on. I can prove he was behind the shooting. Will Marco's people believe you? They will when I deliver Paolo to them. The casual violence in those words made Luca's stomach turn. You're going to hand him over to be killed. I'm going to hand him over to face justice from the people he betrayed. What they do with him after that is their business. That's not justice. That's execution. In my world, they're the same thing. Enzo looked at him. Does this bother you, seeing what I actually do? Yes. No point in lying. But I knew who you were when I chose to be here. Knowing and seeing are different. I'm aware. Luca moved to the window, needed distance to think. I'm not going to pretend this doesn't conflict with everything I believe in, but I also understand that stopping this war means fewer people die. So maybe the math works out. That's pragmatic of you. My father was an idealist. It got him killed. Luca turned back. I'm trying to be smarter than that. Enzo stood, cross to him. Your father was brave. Don't diminish that. I'm not. I'm just saying that bravery and stupidity sometimes look the same, and I'd rather survive than be a martyr. Even if survival means compromising your principles? I'm not compromising. I'm adapting. Luca met his eyes. There's a difference. The exchange with Paolo happened 2 days later. Enzo arranged a meeting with Marco's top lieutenants, showed them the evidence, and watched as their rage shifted from him to Paolo. The young man was dragged out screaming, and Luca tried not to think about what would happen next. It's over, Enzo said afterward. They were back in his apartment, both exhausted. The war's been prevented, for now. What about Paolo's people? Won't they retaliate? Paolo didn't have people. He had ambitions. Without him, they'll scatter. Luca nodded, processing. They'd prevented a war, saved lives, but the cost was one man's death. Utilitarian math that made sense on paper, but felt ugly in practice. I need to tell you something, he said, about the evidence, about finishing what my father started. Enzo looked at him, wary. What about it? I've been thinking about what he said in that video, about choosing life over revenge, happiness over justice. Luca took a breath. And I think maybe the best way to honor him isn't to destroy you in the process of taking down the organization. It's to help you dismantle it the right way. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to work with you, want to help build the case for the FBI, make sure the evidence is solid, ensure the right people go down and the innocent ones are protected. Luca's voice steadied. My father trusted you with this. I'm choosing to trust you too. Enzo crossed the room in 2 strides, pulled Luca into his arms. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. They held each other while the city hummed outside, 2 broken people trying to build something whole from shattered pieces. There's something else, Luca said into Enzo's shoulder. Something I found in my father's notes. What? A name. Someone he was planning to interview right before he died. Someone high up in the organization who wanted to talk, to go on record about the weapons operation. Enzo pulled back. Who? Michael Torres. Do you know him? The color drained from Enzo's face. He's dead. Died in a car accident 6 months before your father was killed. That's convenient. Too convenient. Enzo's mind was already working. If Vincent killed Torres to prevent him from talking, then maybe there are others. Other people who wanted to come forward but were silenced. And if we can find evidence of those murders, if we can connect them to the weapons operation, Enzo's eyes met his. That's the smoking gun. That's what brings the whole thing down. They spent the rest of the night going through old files, cross-referencing deaths with timeline markers in Antonio's notes. By dawn, they had a list of 7 people who died under suspicious circumstances in the year before Antonio's investigation went public. 7 potential witnesses, all silenced. This is it, Luca said, exhaustion making his voice thin. This is what my father was building toward. Not just the weapons smuggling, but the systematic murder of anyone who tried to stop it. We need to bring this to Agent Chen now. Are you ready for that? Once you hand this over, there's no going back. Your entire family goes down. My family is already gone. Enzo's voice was quiet. Vincent's dead, my father's dead, Sophia's dead. The only family I have left is you, and I'm not losing you to protect an organization that's already destroyed everyone I've ever loved. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. I'm your family now? Luca asked softly. If you'll have me. Enzo's vulnerability was naked on his face. I know I don't deserve it. Know I've done terrible things. But Luca, you're the only good thing in my life. The only person who makes me want to be better. And if that makes me selfish, then I'm selfish, but I'm not letting you go. Luca kissed him, tasting coffee and exhaustion and desperate hope. Then don't. They called Agent Chen the next morning and arranged a meeting. It was time to finish what Antonio Virelli had started 7 years ago. Time to choose justice over vengeance, truth over silence, and the messy, complicated future over the blood-soaked past. And for the first time since his father died, Luca felt like he was moving forward instead of just surviving. Agent Sarah Chen was younger than Luca expected, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of focused intensity that came from years of chasing criminals who were always 3 steps ahead. She met them in a federal building downtown, in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and fluorescent lighting. Mr. Moretti, she said, shaking Enzo's hand with professional coolness. I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. I know. Enzo set a briefcase on the table. I wasn't ready before. And you're ready now. I don't have a choice anymore. He glanced at Luca. The stakes are too high to keep playing it safe. Chen's gaze shifted to Luca, assessing. Antonio Virelli's son. I remember your father. He was a good journalist. Honest. Thank you, Luca said quietly. He came to me once, about 6 months before he died. Wanted to know if the FBI was investigating the Moretti family. I told him we were building a case, but didn't have enough for indictments. Chen's expression tightened. A week later, he was dead. I've always wondered if my answer got him killed. It wasn't your fault, Enzo said. Vincent would have moved against him regardless. Antonio was too close to the truth, and now you're here to give me that truth. Chen sat down, pulled out a notepad. So let's hear it. All of it. For the next 4 hours, they walked her through everything. The weapons smuggling operation, the bribes, the systematic murders of potential witnesses. Enzo provided insider knowledge, shipment routes, financial structures, the names of everyone involved from top to bottom. Luca added his father's evidence, the documents Antonio had spent his last months compiling. Chen took notes without interruption, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. This is enough, she said finally. More than enough. With this, we can bring RICO charges against the entire organization, everyone from the leadership down to the foot soldiers. How long? Enzo asked. To build the case? 6 months, maybe 8? We'll need to verify everything, coordinate with other agencies, make sure the evidence chain is airtight. Chen looked at him directly. You understand what this means for you? Prison. 20 years minimum, probably more. And you're willing to accept that? Yes. No hesitation. As long as the organization is destroyed, as long as the people who've been profiting from violence finally face consequences, including yourself, especially myself. Chen studied him for a long moment. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of criminals try to make deals, try to trade information for immunity, but I've never seen someone willingly offer themselves up for prosecution with no ask for leniency. I'm not looking for leniency. I'm looking for redemption. Enzo's voice was steady. And that doesn't come from walking away clean. Noted. Chen closed her notebook. I'll need you to wear a wire for the next few months. Continue operating normally while we gather additional evidence. Can you do that? Yes. And you, she turned to Luca, you're willing to testify? About your father's investigation, about what you found. Luca's throat tightened. Testifying meant standing in court, telling the world how his father had died. It meant reliving every painful detail under cross-examination, meant watching Enzo be sentenced for crimes that included letting Antonio die. But it also meant finishing what his father started, meant giving Antonio's death meaning beyond tragedy. I'll testify, he said. Chen nodded. Good. We'll need both of you to stay safe during the investigation. Mr. Moretti, your life is in danger the moment anyone suspects you've turned. And Mr. Virelli, your leverage against him. I can offer protective custody. No. Enzo cut her off. I can protect us better than the FBI can. I know how my organization operates, know how to stay ahead of threats. That's against protocol. Protocol gets people killed in my world. I'll wear the wire, I'll get you everything you need, but we do this my way. Chen didn't look happy, but she agreed. They spent another hour going over logistics, dead drops for evidence, encrypted communication channels, emergency protocols if Enzo's cover was blown. By the time they left the federal building, Luca's head was spinning. Are you okay? Enzo asked in the car. I don't know. 6 months of living a lie, pretending everything is normal while you're building a case against your own family. Luca shook his head. How are you so calm about this? I'm not calm. I'm terrified. Enzo's hands tightened on the wheel. But I've been living a lie for years. At least now the lie has a purpose. They drove in silence for a while. Then Luca asked the question that had been gnawing at him since the meeting ended. What happens to us after this is over? Enzo didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was rough. I go to prison. You go back to your life. Build a career. Find someone who isn't broken. Live the life your father wanted for you. That's not what I asked. It's the only answer that makes sense. Fuck sense. Luca's voice rose. I'm asking what you want. What we are to each other after this. Luca, don't give me the noble sacrifice speech. Don't tell me you're setting me free or protecting me from yourself. Just tell me the truth. Enzo pulled the car over, killed the engine. They were on a side street near the river, empty except for a few joggers. He turned to face Luca, and the raw emotion on his face was almost too much to look at. I want everything I can't have. I want to wake up next to you every morning. Want to build a life that isn't defined by crime and guilt. Want to be the kind of man your father would have approved of. Enzo's voice cracked. But that's not reality. Reality is, I'm going to prison for a very long time, and tying you to me means you spend your best years visiting a felon behind glass. What if I want that anyway? Then you're an idiot, probably. Luca grabbed Enzo's face, forced him to maintain eye contact. But I'm an idiot who's choosing you, not the sanitized, redeemed version you think you need to become. You, right now, flawed and guilty and trying to be better. Why? Because I love you, you stubborn bastard. The words came out fierce, angry, undeniable. Because somewhere between hating you and understanding you, I fell in love. And I know it's complicated and messy and probably the worst decision I've ever made. But it's my decision, mine. Not my father's ghost, not your guilt, not anyone else's judgment. Mine. Enzo kissed him hard, desperate, like he was trying to communicate everything he couldn't say with words. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were wet. I love you too, he said quietly, which is why I can't ask you to wait for me. You're not asking, I'm offering. Luca, we'll figure it out. After the trial, after sentencing, we'll figure out what this looks like. But we do it together, okay? Enzo pulled him close, buried his face in Luca's neck. Okay. They sat there in the car while the sun set over Chicago, holding each other like the world might end at any moment. And in a way, it was ending. The life Enzo had known, the organization he'd inherited, the identity he'd carried for 35 years, all of it was about to burn. But something new was being born from the ashes. Something fragile and uncertain, but real. The next 6 months were the longest of Luca's life. He watched Enzo wear a wire to meetings, recording conversations with people who trusted him. Watched him make deals and give orders and play the part of crime boss while secretly dismantling everything from within. It was exhausting and terrifying, and Luca lived in constant fear that someone would notice, would realize Enzo had turned, would put a bullet in him before the FBI could move. But Enzo was good at deception, had spent his whole life playing roles, managing perceptions, and now that skill was being used for something that resembled justice. Luca finished his degree during those months, criminology with honors, though the irony of studying crime while living with a criminal wasn't lost on him. He applied to graduate programs, thinking about the future beyond the trial, thinking about what came after. They didn't talk about it much. Both of them were focused on getting through each day without Enzo getting killed or the investigation falling apart. But sometimes, late at night when Enzo couldn't sleep, he'd talk about what he wanted to do with his life after prison. I want to work with kids, he said one night. They were on the balcony, sharing a cigarette Enzo had bummed off one of his drivers. Kids like Sophia, who get caught up in drugs because they don't have better options. I want to build programs, create opportunities, give them the chance my sister never got. You could do that, Luca said. After you serve your time, start a foundation or something. Who's going to listen to a convicted felon? People who understand that redemption is real, that people can change. Luca took the cigarette, took a drag. My father would have listened. Your father was a better man than most. He was human, made mistakes, had flaws, but he believed in second chances. Luca handed the cigarette back. I inherited that from him. Enzo smiled, sad and grateful. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. You deserve whatever you're willing to work for. And you're working for this, for us. 3 months into the investigation, everything went to hell. Enzo came home early one afternoon, face pale, moving with the controlled urgency of someone trying not to panic. What's wrong? Luca asked. Someone knows. I don't know who or how, but there's a leak somewhere. Enzo was already packing bags, pulling weapons from hidden compartments. We need to leave. Now. What happened? I got a call. Anonymous. Said they know I'm working with the FBI. Said I have 48 hours to disappear before they come for me. Luca's blood went cold. Could it be a bluff? Maybe, but I'm not gambling your life on maybe. Enzo thrust a bag at him. Pack essentials. We're going to a safe house Chen set up for emergencies. They were out of the apartment in 15 minutes, driving through Chicago with Enzo checking mirrors constantly. He called Chen from a burner phone, spoke in code that Luca didn't fully understand. By the time they reached the safe house, a nondescript condo in Evanston, Chen was already there with 2 other agents. We're moving the timeline up, she said without preamble. If there's a leak, we need to execute the arrest now before everyone scatters. I haven't finished getting all the evidence, Enzo protested. What you've given us is enough. We'll work with what we have. Chen's expression was grim. But Mr. Moretti, you need to understand, moving this fast means some people might escape prosecution. The case won't be as airtight. How many people are we talking about? Maybe 10, 15, lower-level operators who we don't have direct evidence against. Enzo's jaw clenched. And the big fish? The leadership? We've got them cold. Financial records, wire recordings, witness testimony. They're going down. Then do it. Execute the warrants. Chen nodded. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Coordinated raids across the city. We'll arrest 43 people simultaneously, seize assets, shut down operations. She looked at Luca. You'll both be in protective custody until the trials are over. No contact with anyone outside, no exceptions. How long? Luca asked. Could be months, could be a year. Chen's voice softened slightly. I know that's hard, but it's the only way to keep you safe. That night, their last night of freedom, before everything changed, Luca and Enzo lay in bed in the safe house and talked about everything and nothing. About Luca's graduate school applications, about Enzo's plans for after prison, about the life they might build together someday if the universe was kind enough to allow it. I'm scared, Luca admitted in the darkness. Of what? That I'll lose you. That prison will change you. That by the time you get out, we'll be strangers. Enzo pulled him closer. Then we write letters, visit when they allow it, find ways to stay connected even when we're apart. That's not the same as this. No, but it's something. Enzo's hand found his in the darkness. And something is better than nothing. Is it enough? It has to be. They made love that night with a desperation born of knowing it might be months before they could touch again. And when they finally fell asleep, tangled together, Luca dreamed of his father. In the dream, Antonio was sitting at his old desk, typing on his ancient computer. He looked up when Luca entered, smiled that crooked smile. Hey kiddo, you doing okay? I don't know, Dad. I think I've made a mess of everything. By falling in love with Enzo Moretti? Yeah, that's pretty messy. Antonio's smile widened. But messy doesn't mean wrong. You're not angry that I'm with someone whose family killed you? I'm dead, Luca. Being angry about it doesn't change anything. Antonio stood, moved closer. But you're alive, and you're doing something good, finishing what I started, helping Enzo become better. That's not betrayal. That's evolution. I miss you. I miss you too. But kiddo, you can't live your life mourning me. You have to move forward. Build something new. Antonio's hand rested on his shoulder, warm and solid. I'm proud of you. For choosing love over hate. for being brave enough to forgive. Luca woke with tears on his face and Enzo already awake beside him, watching. Bad dream? Enzo asked. No, actually, I think it was a good one. The raids happened at dawn, precisely coordinated chaos across Chicago. Luca and Enzo watched it unfold on news broadcasts from the safe house. Federal agents in tactical gear storming buildings, leading people out in handcuffs. The Moretti organization, dismantled in a single morning. Enzo watched in silence as people he'd known for years were arrested. Some of them deserved it, had blood on their hands, had chosen violence over humanity. Others were just people who'd made bad choices or been born into the wrong family. The collateral damage of bringing down an empire. Are you okay? Luca asked. No, but I will be. Enzo turned away from the television. This needed to happen, even if it hurts to watch. The trial began 8 months later. Luca testified about his father's investigation, about the evidence Antonio had compiled, about the systematic murders of witnesses. He stood in court and looked at the defendants, men in expensive suits who'd built fortunes on suffering, and told the truth without flinching. When it was Enzo's turn, he testified against his own organization with the same unflinching honesty. Named names, explained operations, provided details that only an insider could know. And when the defense attorneys tried to paint him as a liar seeking immunity, he corrected them. I'm not seeking immunity. I'm guilty of everything I'm describing. I participated, I profited, I enabled. The only difference between me and them is that I'm trying to make it right. They're still pretending they did nothing wrong. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they came back, the verdicts were almost unanimous. Guilty on all major counts for the organization's leadership. Lesser charges stuck to the lower-level operators, exactly as Chen had predicted. Enzo's sentencing came last. The judge, an older woman who'd spent 30 years on the bench, looked at him with something that might have been pity or disgust, or both. Mr. Moretti, you've cooperated extensively with federal prosecutors. You've provided evidence that brought down a criminal enterprise and saved countless lives. However, you've also admitted to being part of that enterprise for over a decade, to enabling violence, to profiting from illegal activities, to allowing innocent people to be killed. Enzo stood straight, hands clasped in front of him. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Only that I'm sorry. To the victims, to the families, to everyone who suffered because of my cowardice and complicity. I can't undo what I've done, but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. The judge was quiet for a moment, then she spoke. I'm sentencing you to 18 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 12. I'm also ordering you to forfeit all assets obtained through criminal enterprise and to pay restitution to identified victims. You'll be transferred to FCI Sandstone in Minnesota to begin serving your sentence immediately. 18 years. 12 before parole. Luca felt the number settle in his chest like a stone. Enzo looked back at him from the defendant's table, and Luca saw relief in his expression. Not happiness. How could there be happiness in a prison sentence? But relief that it was finally over, that the debt was being paid. Luca nodded, mouthed, I love you. Enzo mouthed it back. Then he was led away in handcuffs, and Luca was left sitting in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and justice, that came too late for some people, but maybe, just maybe, not too late for everyone. The first year was the hardest. Luca visited Enzo every month, driving 4 hours to Minnesota to sit across from him in a visitation room and talk through phones connected by thick glass. They wrote letters constantly. Luca about graduate school and his thesis research, Enzo about prison programs he was starting, books he was reading, the slow work of becoming someone new. It wasn't what Luca had imagined when he'd fallen in love. Wasn't the life his father would have wanted for him. But it was real, and it was theirs, and somehow that made it worth it. He finished his master's degree in criminal justice with a thesis on restorative justice practices. Got a job with a nonprofit that worked with at-risk youth, building exactly the kind of programs Enzo had talked about during those long nights on the balcony. Started making a difference in small ways, one kid at a time. And every month he drove to Minnesota and sat across from Enzo and reminded him that he wasn't alone, that someone was waiting, that redemption wasn't just possible but happening, slowly and imperfectly, one day at a time. 5 years into the sentence, something changed. Enzo's parole hearing was scheduled earlier than expected, based on good behavior and his work developing rehabilitation programs inside the prison. Luca drove to Minnesota for the hearing, sat in the gallery, and listened as Enzo spoke to the parole board. I'm not the same person who entered this prison. I've spent 5 years working to understand why I made the choices I made, why I stayed complicit in an organization that destroyed lives. And I've spent 5 years trying to give back, teaching financial literacy, helping other inmates prepare for re-entry, creating programs that I hope will break the cycle that trapped me. But do you deserve to be released early? One of the board members asked. You admitted to serious crimes, to letting people die. No, I don't deserve it. Enzo's voice was steady. But I'm asking anyway. Not because I've paid my debt. I don't think I can ever fully pay it. But because I can do more good outside than in. I can build the programs my sister needed. I can honor the man who died believing I could be better. I can live a life that means something beyond survival. The board deliberated for 2 hours. When they came back, the answer was yes. Conditional parole, effective immediately. Enzo would serve the remainder of his sentence under supervision, with strict conditions, regular check-ins, community service requirements, prohibitions on associating with known criminals. But he was free. Luca waited outside the prison when Enzo walked through the gates. He looked older, more gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes, the kind of worn-down weariness that came from hard years. But he was smiling, and when he saw Luca, the smile became something incandescent. Hey, Enzo said. Hey yourself. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Then Luca closed the distance and kissed him, right there in the prison parking lot, not caring who saw or what they thought. Ready to go home? Luca asked when they finally broke apart. Where's home? Wherever we are. Together. They drove back to Chicago with the windows down and music playing, talking about everything and nothing. About the apartment Luca had rented for them. About the job Enzo had lined up at a community center. About building a life that wasn't defined by the past, but informed by it. It wasn't perfect. Enzo still had nightmares about Sofia, about Antonio, about all the people he'd failed. Luca still had moments where he looked at Enzo and saw the man whose family had killed his father. They went to therapy, together and separately, and worked through the complicated mess of loving someone you should probably hate. But they worked. Imperfectly, awkwardly, but genuinely. And slowly, the life they built started to look like something Antonio Virelli might have approved of. A year after Enzo's release, Luca took him to the cemetery where his father was buried. It was the first time Enzo had visited since Antonio's death. I don't know what to say to him, Enzo admitted, standing at the grave. Then don't say anything. Just be here. Acknowledge what happened, what you did and didn't do. Enzo knelt, placed his hand on the headstone. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for failing you, for choosing wrong, for taking so long to find the courage you tried to give me. The stone didn't answer, but the wind moved through the trees, and somewhere in the distance a bird called. I'm trying to be the man you believed I could be, Enzo continued. I'm trying to honor what you died for. And I'm taking care of your son, loving him the way he deserves. I know that's not enough, that nothing I do can make up for what I didn't do, but I'm trying anyway. Luca's hand found Enzo's shoulder, squeezed. They stayed there for a while, the three of them, 2 living, 1 dead, connected by choices and consequences and the messy, complicated work of forgiveness. When they finally left, Luca felt lighter, like something that had been pressing on his chest for years had finally loosened its grip. Thank you, he said in the car. For what? For trying. For becoming someone my father would have been proud to know. I'm not there yet. Maybe not, but you're closer than you think. That night, lying in bed in the apartment they shared, Enzo asked the question he'd been holding for months. Do you think we'll ever be normal? Have a life that isn't defined by guilt and atonement? Luca thought about it. I don't know. Maybe normal isn't the goal. Maybe the goal is just being honest about who we are and choosing each other anyway. That's a low bar. It's a realistic one. Luca turned to face him. We're never going to be the couple that has a simple love story. We're always going to be the journalist's son and the crime boss who let him die. But we're also the people who chose forgiveness over hatred, who built something good from something terrible. And I think that counts for something. Yeah. Enzo pulled him close. Yeah, it does. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in years, neither of them dreamed of the dead. 2 years later, Luca stood in front of a crowd at a community center opening. It was a program for at-risk youth built with funding from the Enzo Moretti Foundation, a nonprofit they'd started together, named for both men who'd shaped their lives. Enzo stood beside him, nervous in a way that had nothing to do with facing down criminals and everything to do with public speaking. My father believed in redemption, Luca said to the crowd, believed that people could change, that systems could be reformed, that justice wasn't about punishment, but about creating a better future. He died fighting for that belief. And this center, this work, is how we honor that fight. He stepped aside, let Enzo speak. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I'm a good person, Enzo said. His voice was steady but rough. I've done terrible things, hurt people, made choices I can't take back. But I'm trying to be better. And this center is part of that. It's about giving kids the opportunities I had but didn't use, the support my sister needed but didn't get, the chance to choose differently than I did. The crowd applauded, and Luca felt something swell in his chest. Pride, maybe, or hope, or just the quiet satisfaction of seeing something good built from ruins. After the ceremony, they walked through the center together, past classrooms and computer labs and a gymnasium that echoed with the sound of basketballs. Kids everywhere, laughing and learning and just being kids. The kind of kids who might have ended up in gangs or prison or dead if someone hadn't cared enough to offer them another path. Your father would have loved this, Enzo said quietly. Yeah, he would have. Luca's eyes were wet. And I think he'd be proud of us for choosing this, for building something that matters. You think he'd forgive me? I think forgiveness isn't about what he'd do. It's about what we choose to do with the time we have. Luca turned to face him. And I choose this, us, this work, every day. Enzo kissed him, gentle and sure, and Luca tasted 7 years of grief and guilt and hard-won peace. I love you, Enzo said. I love you too. They stood there in the center they'd built together, surrounded by the sound of kids getting a second chance. And Luca thought about his father's last words on that video, about choosing life over revenge, happiness over justice, building instead of destroying. He'd made that choice, had chosen to love the man whose family had killed his father, had chosen to forgive instead of hate, had chosen to honor Antonio's legacy by creating something that would outlive them both. It wasn't a perfect ending, wasn't clean or simple or the kind of story that tied up neatly, but it was real. It was theirs. And it was enough. Some people are born into darkness, and some are dragged in kicking and screaming. But what matters isn't how you arrive. It's whether you find the courage to walk back toward the light. Whether you choose redemption over resignation, love over hatred, forgiveness over revenge. Luca had made that choice. So had Enzo. And together, imperfectly and honestly, they'd built a life that proved Antonio Virelli's faith hadn't been misplaced. That redemption was real. That people could change. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to believe in someone else's capacity for good, and then help them become it. That was the truth Luca carried forward. Not that justice had been served or that the past had been erased, but that from tragedy and loss, something meaningful had grown. Something that would help other kids avoid the paths that had destroyed so many lives. Something that honored both the father who'd died seeking truth and the man who'd spent years learning how to live with guilt. And on quiet nights when Luca stood in the cemetery talking to his father's grave, he could say with absolute certainty that he'd lived the life Antonio had wanted for him. Not a life free from pain or complexity, but a life fully lived. A life that chose hope over despair, connection over isolation, and love. Messy, complicated, hard-won love, over the safe numbness of detachment. Because in the end, that's what it meant to be human. To fail and try again. To hurt and heal. To choose over and over, to build something good from the wreckage of what came before. And in a world shaped by power and loss, that choice, the choice to love anyway, to forgive anyway, to hope anyway, was the bravest ending of all.